Howdy, my name is Derek Henry with XLEV8 Consulting, and in this how-to video we're going to talk about a couple of macros that help you work with APIs. Now, what does that mean? That means this is a really efficient and controlled way to connect Excel to applications directly instead of exporting and importing and having to browse for files and things. This can do it directly. So in exporting, we're talking about taking data from applications, bringing it right into Excel, reporting basically, or on the flip side, we want to take information within Excel and import it directly into applications for administrative purposes or just to make them work. Now, when you make this run, it's going to add a tab to your ribbon called XLEV8 Space API. Now, you actually get to design what this ribbon tab looks like, how many sections there are, how many menus, and how many buttons within each menu, like you're seeing here, even what icons to display. You can have up to 8 categories, up to 4 menus per category, and up to 10 buttons per menu. So that's up to 320 buttons across however many applications it makes sense that you want to use. Now, to make this work, and you're kind of seeing some of the applications I've used in my past up here represented. To set this up initially, you're going to want to run a macro called configure API settings. So launch that search box or use the ribbon tab or keyboard shortcut, type in a couple of letters in that if you're using the search box. And what it's going to do is it's going to open or build a file called XLEV8_API. And it's going to tell you that there are 3 sheets in there that are required to make it work. Now, if you've never used this before, it's going to build them for you. If you have used it before, it's going to open this file up, decrypt it so you can kind of see what it is that's working, and you can configure it. Now, obviously I don't want to share any credentials, so I've whited those out so that those can't be visible, but you would fill in things like what the account URL is or what the subdomain is, etc. These are common credentials that you would use for different APIs. Not all of them are always used. Sometimes they all are, but normally one or more of these are. If they're open, the only thing you might have is an API key, right? And you will just name it accordingly. Now, you get to use up to 20 separate accounts or logins, different applications. Notice some of them are the same here. Notice how you have 20 different columns. These are all yellow because they're just not being used. If you don't put in a name, then it's okay, it can be blank. But as long as you put in a name, you're gonna at least have to identify what application and then put in probably some type of credentials. If nothing else, just an API key. Now, these 3 sheets are going to be related, so whatever we've filled in here, notice we've got the application name, that's a big one. In the API calls, you're going to want to build this out. So what group should it be in? So if you look at how these all work, we've got groups here. Within that, we've got different menu labels. You see the different menu labels, and within those, we have different button labels. Now, this will guide you through it. You have to have, right, certain things going on here. So you can have up to 8 different names. Within each group name, you can have up to 4 different menu labels, and within each of those, you can have 10 unique buttons per menu within a group. So keep that in mind. If you're getting errors because you're trying to set it up differently, that's what's going on, and it will alert you. If you have any errors as you set this up, it will add those to this sheet over here, direct you to the exact cell that's causing the issue. So put in your different labels, what description do you want to give it when you hover over, like this one right here. Whenever you hover over, it's going to tell you, oh there you go, get the last 30 days of weather. So that's going to be pulling directly from here. Application, this should match the exact text. So I would recommend copying and pasting of what you have on the credential sheet. And then here's your endpoint, right? Let's use the weather one. So if we were to use that, right, what's going on here? Here is the API call that it should be using. Now notice there's some variables here. So if you put in brackets and you want to put in a sheet name and a range name, go for it. I'll show you how that works in just a couple minutes. You can have as many of those as you want. The other 2 options for putting in variables with these curly brackets are a prompt. So over here it's going to say whatever the prompt value is, whatever the user enters, like what report name should we retrieve. So that it kind of tells you what to do in the header comments up here. Enter it like this, it's going to prompt them with the text after the curly brackets here, and it'll use that as a part of the URL, right? So right here, the report ID should be the prompt value. So if you want to prompt the user with a message, that's one way to do it. Or in the case of the weather one, we want to have inputs. So we're going to put in a location and a date to start and an end date, and then that API key, notice these aren't curly brackets, these are square brackets. This API key maps to right here. So we just want to literally, it would take cell E16 here, and it's going to append that to the API endpoint, and it's going to use that when it calls. And then what kind of connection is this? Are we going to put or post data, or are we going to get it? Those are the most common ones there. Is it an import or an export? That's going to drive how it sets everything up. You know, what content type is it? There's several different common ones listed here in the drop-down menu. And in what format is the data in that is going to be imported away from Excel into your app, or exported from your app into Excel? Normally you've got JSON, sometimes it's CSV, sometimes it's tab delimited text. That's what that means. These are all defined in the header. What sheet name is it going to use? Now, if you're importing data, you need to have this sheet. If you don't have it yet, it will build it for you. We'll walk through that in a couple of minutes. You're going to need a status URL, okay? If you want to be able to check to see what is the status of it and then what errors are there, what is the success code going to be. Normally that's 200, sometimes it's 202, sometimes it's something else. And then, you know, if you're going to look for the response, notice import ID here, that's what's going to be responded to. That's why we're putting it right here. So it's going to leverage whatever that value is there. So import ID equals, you know, 57823. It uses that here for the status and the error if it's an import. Now, if it's an export, you can define what fields you want to get in the export of the data. You can ignore some if you want. That's what is going to happen here in the sheet name. So we're going to walk through in the API fields over here how this is all connected. And if you have a dependency, so like in this one, you need to have the reports list run first, and then whatever cell value you have is used as the identifier. So what cell value here? So there's going to be some kind of unique ID filled into the API call based on a cell value in this sheet. So that's how it works together. There's a bit of trial and error with this to get it to work just right. I know it has been in my case when I've been using it. Just try it out, see if it works for you. You can also give a response message. So after you run this one, it lists out a list and it says, hey, to retrieve a specific report, okay, go to column A of the sheet called report list. Well, that's where this comes into play. It's kind of guiding the user as you go. So the idea is once you set this up, you can use it yourself, but you can also share this with other colleagues. They can use it as well. And then off to the side, you can decide what menu button. It shows you where you can go to see a list of all the different options for menu buttons and then, menu icons and then button icons as well. These are all kind of boring and similar, right? I've got this little icon here and then a little menu one. You can use whatever you want. There are hundreds of them at the resource listed here in the menu. So just use that. As long as the exact label to that icon is listed, it will leverage it. Otherwise, it'll just put these, or it could be even blank. Now, for API fields, when you're going to import information, there are probably certain fields that you need to enter. Like in this case, this one needs entities. Here are the 4 fields it needs. Okay, is it required? Yes. So put in yes right here. Is there any validation that should be applied? Like in this one, well, it needs to be up to 100 characters. Okay, same for this one. And then the level, it needs to be a number between maybe 1 and 10 or something like that. Right, so this one should match something existing. It could be true, false, it could be a list. If it's a long list, you can have it on a separate sheet. So in this case, it's this name with a exclamation mark and then the range name, so sheet name, exclamation point, range name. That needs to be the case. So over here, we've got this list of all the currency codes. This is actually a range name. Okay, so if you're going to leverage this, if you want your other users or even yourself to use this, you need to copy the sheet and all the values, the sheet name and the range name need to be in this XLEV8 API sheet. And then you can apply this validation. Any validation applied in this column right here is going to be created in a sheet with this name. Here are the fields at the top. Here whether required. Any of the comments will be copied as well. And then the validation will also be applied. We'll look at this as an example in just a minute. So importing information, you're going to need certain fields. List those out here. This sheet name should match the sheet name over here, okay, entities. All right, if it doesn't, this isn't going to work right. And here's all the fields you're going to need. Okay, now let's go to the bottom. Here we've got a couple of the export calls. So in this case, it says weather list, right? So weather list would be listed right here. That's where it's going to go export to. And here we're able to tell it exactly what we want. So when you run this, what I'd recommend if you want to get a specific format, Let it run. Don't define a sheet. Don't define fields. It will give you the JSON tree structure if it's in that format. If it's not, you don't need to do this. But if it's in that format, it's going to give you this crazy structure that's a system-to-system kind of a structure. But for the rest of us, we generally like data to be clean in a tabular format. So in this case, what it's doing, and it describes this in the cell comment here, if there's more than one of the items, it's going to have a collection. That collection could be the word items, it could be the word days, it could be something altogether different. There may not even be one. That's why you see this pipe character is the first character. So there's 3 components to this. When you want to export information and only grab certain fields, you're going to put in the item, if there is one, or blank, then a pipe character, and then what item within the collection or traversing the tree, and then what label do you want to give it when it ultimately exports the data. So this is pretty simple because there's a days and you have these fields and then we want that to be the value. Well, in the songs here, we want it to be in the items collection and we want to traverse from track to artist to the first one to the name, and that is what we want for the artist. And somewhat similar but not as deep down the tree, we want the song name. Okay, so there's this giant structure in some cases and you might want to traverse through that. And so when you have a level and you want to kind of denote a parent-child relationship, put an equal sign and a greater than sign, just like this. And again, try this out. It's not working exactly how you want. Just try something a little bit different and likely you'll get it. Otherwise, send us a help message. So this is everything that we've configured. Now, when you're done, when you've configured all 3 of these things to make sure you've done it right, okay, to make sure there's no validation issues, we're gonna run it again. And again, type the word configure or some part of it. If there's any errors, it will put them over here on this sheet. If not, it's going to save this. Now, if there's a lot of cell comments, notice in the background I've got a bunch of those copying and pasting. It could take a few seconds. Now, when you're setting this up, one of the ways to test whether your connections are right is to run a macro called test API connection. Okay, so that's one of the things that you can leverage if you want to make sure that you've put in those credentials correctly. So to do that, just select one of the columns on the API credentials sheet and run it. Test API credentials. Another one of the things you might want to do when you're going between some of the different API accounts that you have, right? You might want to toggle between it. You know, if you've kind of connected and you've gotten a token, if it's a token-based API, and you're on weather, but you want to do Spotify, well, it's going to tell you to toggle between that. So let's test this out real quick. If we want to get new songs, this is literally one of the playlists that I like on Spotify. It says, hey, this API call is not the one that you're kind of activated. So you can toggle between these, and notice in this list, we've got 10 of them here. Okay, well, we were using the weather one. So right now we want to switch to Spotify. Just enter a 1, whatever the number is corresponding with the app you want to control, and then it changes it for you. It tells you down at the bottom what it did too. So if we want to get a list of all these particular songs, just click that, and it's literally going to build this out for you. So it traversed through that JSON structure, and notice here's the artist, here's the song. It literally applied all those settings that we put together, and here's our output, right? It's kind of cool. Now there's another one I want to run, okay, that has inputs attached to it. Okay, so if we do want to run the weather run, we're going to come over here, we're going to go weather, get weather history. Notice again, we have to toggle back to the other API. So we're just enter 4. Now we are connected to that one. So we have this input sheet. We need these 3 fields in order for this API to work. If we don't have those in there, it's going to tell us it's not working, and it'll show you the URL it's trying to use. And if you see curly brackets, you probably forgot to use your inputs. So in this case, if we want to get some weather history, it's going to leverage each of these. And look at this. It gave us for each of the dates, max and min temp, the wind speed, the direction, precip, sunrise, and sunset. There are a lot more fields in the output available. Those are just the 7 or 8 that I wanted, right? For you, use whatever you want. So those are examples of how you would export information via API without having to go anywhere, brings it right in. There are other ways to do that with Power Query and Power BI and some of these other fancy new Excel features. This is one way that if you need something from a specific application, it lets you do it really efficiently. A lot of times there's not even an export option. You'd have to just type it in manually. Who wants to do that? But more of the power in this is in importing information. Now, to make this work, I want to show you one other way that you can run this easily. So rather than use the API sheet, okay, we're gonna We're going to import some users, okay, for this application up here. Okay, but there's another way to do that. Rather than going to the tab, because if you know me well, you know that I hate using a mouse, we're going to use the search macros box and type in users. Okay, now there's a couple of these, so you might want to name them a little differently. I just happen to know I'm looking for the top one. But what's going to happen is any of these API endpoints that you set up, it's going to put API in brackets within the search macros box. Just like it would do with active workbook macros here with over here. These make it really easy to run just based on typing a couple letters, just like Googling, right? So we're going to press enter there. We're going to toggle again because we want to use one of these other apps. Okay, so then let's do it again. So what happens is it's looking for a particular sheet. Okay, it's looking for a sheet called users in this case. I just happen to know that's how it works. So what it's going to do is it's going to copy this user sheet and all of the fields that need to be used with it. Okay, you notice how here's all the fields. These would have been listed in that API underscore field sheet, and we got to fill them in. But it gets even better because this is going to do a validation check as you go. So if we want to add this new user named Bob Jones, okay, notice how this was blank a minute ago. Now it says no, it's not valid. And that's because columns B, C, D, F, H, and I are required and they haven't been filled in yet. Or there could be some other validation that you need to be doing. Okay, so as we keep going here, Bob, Jones, Jones, comma, Bob, or whatever the fields are you need to fill in, notice how this is dynamically on the fly giving us validation. I can't overemphasize how important that can be because a lot of times what people do when you have a lot of data to fill in or copy and paste is if you make a mistake on the first row, you're probably going to replicate that by filtering or finding and replacing or copy and pasting or something because Excel makes those things really easy. This helps you know that as you go, you have valid information. So if we want to type in the email address for Bob, whatever that should be, okay, is it active or not, and in what time zone. So we have a long list here. Remember, this is one of those sheets with a list in it that it added for us. Okay, so here's another way to use drop-down list easier. You can press Alt and the down arrow to make it show a list. Press Alt, Shift, and down when you have the XLEV8 add-in installed. And now you have a searchable list. So if we want to say Central Time Zone like where I am, that's a lot easier than scrolling down through probably hundreds of time zones. Okay, so now we have valid information. Now if we take one of these off, again, now it says it's not valid. We have 0 valid records, we have 1 invalid, but once we fill something in, everything's green. This record is valid, we have 1 valid, 0 invalid, and we're good to go. All of the import type of macros for the APIs work this way, where there is a particular sheet with fields that you define as required, as not, as valid or not. Once you fill those in, it's going to add this as the next column after all the ones you require, guiding you whether it's good or not. So once you fill this in, once you have green everywhere, these are all yeses, there's no invalids, right? Then run that same one again. Okay, no, we've run this one a couple times. If it doesn't find the sheet, it builds it for you. If it does find the sheet, it's going to process it. If you have errors, right? So say it says no's here, it'll tell you. It's like we can't even try to connect because you've got issues you've got to work out before we even try to send the data. But if everything's good, it'll say please confirm which account, what app, which one, because you might have multiple, like production and sandbox, or you might have different clients you're supporting or something. Are you sure for this one? So it will prompt you before you import it. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Naturally, you'd say yes. Now what's going to happen is down at the bottom, it's going to say what's going on. Data submitted, awaiting response. So it sends it, it's checking it every couple of seconds or milliseconds. So at this point, when you get this message, again, based on what the success message and all the different things you configured, this means right here that this data was imported to whatever app you're connecting to. Didn't have to import export, it just went in very efficiently. And a lot of times this adds more control than you have with a process you're already using, right? You might have to wait forever just to find out that the first row out of 1,000 had an issue. This way it gives you a little bit more control. You're doing some basic checks right away, and if there's other ways that you can pull data in from an export basis, say here are the valid values for users, or entities or accounts or playlist names or whatever else, you can go ahead and leverage that. That can be connected to this. So hopefully you found this interesting. You got everything you needed to get up and running on this. I encourage you to use this for whatever you've got access to that helps you import and export data more efficiently. If you have issues, just let us know. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day.